Hello, and welcome to another episode of Intune.training, the place to learn how to use Microsoft Intune, the Steve and Adam Show with Ben the Intern, and special guests, Justin Chalfant. I practiced this, Chalfant. How do you say your name? And Cody Mathis. We can't have a smooth intro. Never. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, Justin, sorry, I really butchered your name, mainly because I was laughing through it.
Chalfant? No worries. Chalfant. Yeah, most people do. It's all good.
All right. So, you guys, if you've been in the endpoint management space, ConfigMgr, Intune for any period of time, then hopefully you've heard of PatchMyPC and possibly Justin or Cody, and you've probably heard them speak at any of the different user groups and conferences. And so we decided to have them on our show because we feel like they are some of the best applications experts out there. They've been doing things with applications for quite a long time in the config manager space, and they've started, I think, would you say, Justin, in February you released a Intune only version of PatchMyPC, and we just really wanted to. So let me stop and say, this is not a sponsored or promoted session. But these guys are experts in this space, and we felt like there's no better folks to be talking to about doing this. So we're not here to promote PatchMyPC. It's a great product, and you should support them, and because they give back to the community, and they're amazing guys. But that's it. There's no sponsorship going on here. This is not promoting PatchMyPC. We're talking apps and all the things that these guys have discovered in the process of building their product out, and how we can hopefully share some knowledge about debugging and digging in, deep diving into applications and Intune. So hopefully that's a decent start to it. What do you guys think?
Sounds good.
Sounds accurate.
Yeah,
all right.
Good.
So it's very to the point.
Succinct.
There. Yeah. All right. Well, so Stephen, let's you start. You first question. Pick a topic. Where do we want to go?
So, what do you guys know about moving house? Or is that not what we're talking about today?
Are you guys free for a couple of hours?
Yeah. I need to pack up all my kit.
Stephen, is your wife in the car waiting for you to come down and move stuff right now? Is that?
No, thankfully, she's packing stuff at the moment. Anyway, so probably the big one that I run into quite often on the interwebs and questions on Twitter and all of that great stuff is around that getting Win32 apps up there quickly, up to Intune. How do we test it? How do we validate it? Yes, I'm going to go for the big, meaty one up front, but where do you see that and your experiences around that?
Yeah. Let me see if I can share out here.
Oh, and sorry, before we get into the meat of it, thank you guys for growing beards for the session. I appreciate it. We're still trying to work on Ben. I see you're working on it there. It's good job. Good.
Thank you.
All right, and your demos, it's okay if they fail because otherwise you're going to make us look bad.
Yeah. So I mean, as far as the challenges of Win32 apps in general, is this not sharing? Okay.
Nope. You can just see a black screen
and a mouse.
This is the first challenge.
Does the screen share?
You move the teams. Still nothing?
Still nothing.
Yes.
Okay.
You guys are right
perfect demo.
It's that ultimate dark mode I've heard so much about.
Cool. Well, I guess we could just start by talking about it. Yeah. I mean, I think the big challenge for just third-party apps in general are how often they come out. And if you're trying to actually, so from a config manager admin or Intune admin perspective, I think it's hard enough just to know like when the apps come out, like, keeping up with all these different apps, these different security issues. I think that's hard enough itself, let alone having to go in, get the binaries, figure out the command lines, keep them up to date, like continuously as they come out. So it's definitely a big time constraint. I think is probably the biggest challenge from a admin perspective. And then with regards to Intune, one of the harder things around patching is some of the lack of targeting options that we have available that if you're moving from, say, Config Manager was super easy, right? So one of the big challenges that we had, like, we obviously started as a update, third-party update provider in ConfigMan in 2013, and WSUS has been around forever, right? So you have a lot of customization with how you can detect whether the app is there, whether the app is installed or needed. And it becomes a challenge, like some of the limitations there. And we're working on some stuff that hopefully we can have some part of a demo. But I think it's just staying up to date, and a lot of the manual effort involved in packaging time. Like if you were actually trying to keep up with that yourself is probably the biggest thing that we hear when people are like, hey, I need to keep these apps up to date, but I'm only in Intune.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I think part of that too is there's a different kind of barrier when it comes to Intune from like an automation perspective, because with ConfigMan, you're looking at just a straight up commandlet set. It's part of the product. It's pretty straightforward, decent docs, depending on what you're trying to do. And it's just, I guess, a little more familiar maybe. Whereas so you can do some automated app packaging in SCCM relatively easily. There's a ton of examples out there, tons and tons of them. So you can build something off of that, right? But when it comes to Intune, it's a little less accessible. It's like, Graph API, what's that? What's all this JSON? So you've got those extra barriers, and they're a little bit more daunting. How do I authenticate? What version of PowerShell are you on? That changes how you authenticate.
Sure does.
So you know how long I looked to try to figure out what graph stood for?
Because it stood for something.
The graph. I'm like, where is the picture? I'm not seeing a graph. So yeah.
So that's tough, right? That's a barrier. How do you've kind of obfuscated the automation aspect of things. So I think that's difficult for sure.
I think one of the
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, so one of the interesting things that I've found coming from SCCM and going into Intune and sort of being this evangelist for application packaging and, like really wanting to try and get people to understand that it's a complex skill set, but it's a skill set nonetheless. And going through that process of showing people how to go from not having an application ready for deployment to having it done. And they're just like, that was really cool. I think I get like 90% of that, but I reckon I could do it on my own. And then they sit there, you take a beat and they go, so what do I do about updates? And you go, well, you just do it again and again and again and again and again. And they're like, when does it stop? And you're like, get a new job.
Never.
Like it never stops, like applications will continue to change, obviously.
When that application is no longer used in your environment.
Yeah,
it does stop eventually, right? Adobe Flash is about to be deprecated. You don't have to update that next year.
Yeah. Well,
exactly. That's one. That's 2,000 left to go.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's sort of what I'm getting at is with with Intune, I find the Graph API framework almost easier to work with than SCCM because I've sort of understood it. But it's still a process, to get the application constantly updated. It's not just something that you can install. So, when we go into client environments and we're talking to people and they're like, okay, so how do I do my applications? And we're like, well, you need to know how to do it. And like, but I don't want to. I want Intune.
Then you pay me to do it. Well,
exactly. Yeah. So
you go and engage a third-party vendor that does it all automatically for you.
Exactly.
It's the pay for the pain to go away, but it's a tough one, right? And I'm sure that's how Patch My PC came about. Was people just wanted that problem to go away?
Yeah,
for sure.
Cool.
So in our org, we have I think we've got a portfolio of about 2,000 applications that we manage inside of ConfigMgr.
So that's hang on, that's one app for every 20 employees, 10 employees.
So we'll just ignore that. So so now if we break that out, many of those applications are single device installs, but we prefer to manage them in ConfigMgr instead of saying, let's have this one-off process. We have said, please let us, we don't care how, we'll put a QB on it or we'll let the user walk through the wizard, whatever, but we want to have it in our tool so that we can manage it in some way that doesn't require a separate process, and so that it's easier for us to know about it. But I would say that a large portion of our applications are, just to put a QB on it and move on kind of thing, or Q in or whatever. Like you're just putting it's MSI, put a silent switch. I mean, packages have gotten much better, at least for a large portion of the applications that we deploy. But then you get these one-offs, like we do Aspen Engineering Suite, which is wow, that one's fun. If you've done, I think AutoCAD has recently made the rounds on Twitter.
Oh yeah, AutoCAD is a good one.
Office has always given us headaches. So there are a fair number of very large and complex applications that I would say are the reasons why we have a full-time packager for the most part, because the rest of the stuff is all right. Yeah, just QB, move on. It still takes time. If we build process around that, we can automate importing and scripting and those things. But still, so that's in ConfigMgr. But then you flip it over to Intune and say, well, where do you go for this? So guys, when you're making this transition and you said, okay, let me try to build some automation around this. Where did you start? Like, how do you get started on automating this stuff? I know we've covered a little bit of that early on in some of our stuff, but kind of walk us through your process on making the transition from ConfigMgr, building the bridge.
Yeah. So I mean, what was interesting for us is we had done ConfigMgr applications and we're having the ability to automate not just the update piece, but actually the application piece. So we were probably about like 75% there, right? So I mean, we knew detection logic for these applications. We knew where to get the content. We knew command lines. The big piece for us is we were starting to develop the solution for Intune was how do we get them there? And that's essentially where we started looking into Graph, right? So I mean, that's kind of that layer of this is how I get the app uploaded. This is how I get my detection script uploaded. So that was the big thing for us, and really anybody that, at least if you're looking to automate it, that's going to be kind of the piece that you may have to learn. Even if you're good at packaging, that's kind of that middleman to actually get to a place where you can automate it if that's ultimately the goal of automating and not doing it right in the console. I know Cody has some examples that we can show. So one of the challenges for us is, okay, cool. We had Win32 apps in February. 2020 is when we released that feature. We have the ability to automatically package these base applications for you and keep those base applications up to date. But one of the more challenging things is how do we know what to target in Intune? You can't make query collections based on installed apps. So it kind of had some interesting things around inventory and some stuff that we found. I don't know. Do you want to share out, Cody, and kind of show some examples of some of the graph? So we'll have some graph queries just so you can see some examples of what this looks like to actually say you want to query an app in Graph and some of the limitations and what you can do with some examples, even if you're not using our product here.
So is it a black screen or is it not a black screen?
No,
well,
we can see things.
It's black, but it's supposed to be black. Is the font big enough or no?
I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's good.
Decent. All right, cool. Yeah, so we kind of started messing around with Graph, and one thing that I will say is nice with being able to use PowerShell is you can kind of start to proof of concept things, right? Because I want to do something in C# or VB.NET if you're so subjected to it, you can start in PowerShell. I don't have to compile anything or do any interesting console workaround things. So we'll start to actually do some of the initial layout in PowerShell because I'm still getting in similar data. And so what we ran into, though, which was kind of frustrating, was we query Graph for, we'll say Google Chrome here. And I'll kind of show a little bit of what I'm actually doing here, but we'll start with what the data looks like when I'm getting it back. So I'm just kind of query Graph and try to get back what has Chrome. So what's frustrating is this is how the data is presented. Now there's extra properties, there's more info, but ultimately, right? Apparently, I have Google Chrome installed twice, and apparently Andrew has a Google Chrome problem here, and he's got about 5 installs of Google Chrome, and this isn't great. You can start to manipulate it a little bit and check on dates and get okay info, but yeah, awkward. Now you might have noticed that it took a little while. It seems kind of crazy to get this little bit of info for me to be waiting any length of time, 5.5 seconds. So what we're actually having to do here to actually do this is we have to pull a list of devices first. So I'm actually pulling down a static list of devices first, because at there's no.
Sure.
Sorry, yeah. I'll do a full list format list there. We can just look at a object. So when you query for devices, you don't get the apps that are installed.
No.
Right? It's not immediately there. It's a property that is there. And so, you can actually go in and expand out that additional property in graph. That's not going to run. But, I'm going to adjust my query here. And ultimately, you pass in a device ID. And then from there, you expand out the detected apps kind of property on the object. And the issue is, if you have any decently large number of devices, I now have to do one query to gather a list of devices, or potentially multiple, because there's paging limits. And then after that, I need to now iterate through every single device and pull down a list of apps, which is already not great data, because the limitation on that data itself, it's only MSI-based applications. That's currently what Sidecar and the discovery for Intune is even collecting, is MSI-based apps. And we kind of sent out a message like, hey, what's going on? Is this working as expected? Which it is, unfortunately. They've got some backend infrastructure changes they need to make. Is what we've been told. I don't know the time frame, if, when, but something we can cross our fingers for. We did start to kind of see, okay, it doesn't look like there's an alternative. The graph, the data warehouse data is the same. It's structured the same. It's just old data. And so from there, I looked into graph batching. You can create batches, which helped a little bit. So you can actually send up a batch request to graph. And so it is a batch of queries. So I would actually structure out JSON to have 20 queries at a time. There's a hard limit of 20 queries in a batch. And so now, okay, if I've got 900 devices, you divide it by 20, okay, I've got to do less querying, but it's still slow. There's no nested batching. There's still limitations.
Sure.
So one kind of ray of hope was, potentially you can actually just look at, maybe I thought, if you look at graph docs, you'll actually find that, well, there's a detected apps property of device management in general. But if you actually try to query it with an end quote, what you'll end up noticing is the only thing it actually returns is modern apps, which I don't really care about from this perspective. I'm not interested.
Because they maintain them automatically from Store for Business.
For sure, yeah. So it's not interesting data, and a lot of limitations when it came to graph inventory data. MSI kind of being the real nail in the coffin, because you've just completely eliminated a massive number of applications to inventory. So that's kind of what we're working with in terms of data. We can hit graph, we can get our list of devices, we can start to batch them up to hopefully speed things up. But it's just kind of little shortcomings that add up to a lackluster graph API experience at the moment.
Yeah, and what that really, I think, comes into play is knowing how to target, if you are interested in, say, applying an update, right? So you want to find only machines that have an existing app that is out of date. So I mean, do you want to show like the UI, Cody, real quick of kind of how you can send those batches and return MSI only? I know we can probably post the PowerShell scripts as well, like maybe up on a repo after for just examples. So like even if we could use that data, we would only see the MSIs. So the biggest thing that we've been recently trying to figure out is, well, what about updates? Like once the app is already there, how are we going to patch that? So let's, you're going to share out the query first. Let me see if mine works yet.
Okay, because I have the app, like I can show like the resulting wizard that we created to scan apps. Yeah, that's blackness.
That's black.
That's just.
This could be a resolution thing.
Yeah, or are you running the session as an admin user?
No.
Weird.
Well, so Justin, if you want to try it a little bit and see if you can get it up. I've got a couple follow-on questions for what we just saw. So Cody, the stuff that you were using, hey, that worked.
Hey, there we go.
The stuff that you were using, are you using custom commands, or is that all using built-in commandlets that come as part of the Intune graph thing?
No, so these are just super ad hoc, kind of hacky PowerShell commands. You know, they're not really super dynamic or anything. I've just got a basic get graph data, and you just pass it the tail end of your URI, and it's just pulling it down.
Okay.
It's just stuff that's just strapped together because I'm just kind of trying to POC things. When I kind of started down the rabbit hole, I was like, okay, cool, graph. Let's start playing with graph. And my the light bulbs went off in my head. It's like, oh man, I can make a module and I can make dynamically grab all the metadata and but that's like never mind. Because I know there's already a lot of modules out there that are going to do a lot of this interaction, and I'm just kind of like reinventing the wheel and creating something that's familiar to me. And I think actually at one point, Adam and I kind of chatted about this a little bit on Discord, where it's like I find stuff on the internet, I'm like, that's cool, but like I'll go make my own. It's just a tendency I have. I'm terrible about it.
It's a learning process, though. Honestly,
yeah,
it really
is.
Yeah.
So
you become familiar with it as you poke at it, as you bang your head against the wall. You understand it more. Unfortunately, that's the way I learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm going to support it, so I want to understand it. So if I've got this hacky, crappy function, at least I know I wrote it and I'm responsible for it.
Exactly. I'm the same with, I enjoy reinventing the wheel, because then I understand how the wheel was created. Like
he does.
It's not for anyone else but me, and I know that the things are already out there, but it's the easiest way to learn how an environment works, right? You just jump in.
Sure.
This is equivalent to taking a screwdriver to electronics and taking them apart and figuring out
the first thing you do with any new toy is void the warranty.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that's right.
Yep.
Is this what you wanted to share out, Justin? I saw you were kind of running it.
Yep. Yeah, it's showing up for me. Yeah, you can go over that. So basically what Cody was doing in PowerShell.
Sorry, we may need a little bit zoomy something going on here.
Zoomies. Okay.
I think zoom.
How about this?
Sorry, go ahead, Justin. You've got a thought to get out. I'll let you get it out.
No.
Did that work? No.
Here, let me.
I'm zooming it on the wrong thing.
Control 2.
No, it's not that. It's that zoom it's on my box, not the RDP.
Yeah, I can share out if you want.
Yeah, that'll work. If you've got zoom on your box, that'll be easy.
I think we got it. So basically, the batch that Cody was showing in that PowerShell example, we're doing the same exact thing in our app, and the goal was kind of just exposing data. Now, with the limitations of what's currently available in Intune, so if we go to where is the apps at on the device level, Cody?
So go to devices and go and actually click a device.
Let's look at Andrew.
And then on the left, you can just do discovered apps.
There we go.
So I guess, one thing to kind of speak to here is is when you're navigating around graph, I almost want to say, right, some of the way the data is returned is unfortunately structured in this way. I click an app, I go and get the list of detected app. I'm sorry, I click a device, I then go view the list of apps for that device, and that graph acts that way. I have to make those steps, right? I don't have a SQL database. I can't join these objects. I've got to hit them individually, just like you do in a UI.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, just a quick tip while we're looking at this. Apparently, I haven't tried it, but when you're browsing through Intune, if you open up developer tools in your browser, you can actually see the Intune graph calls that are occurring on each of those pages. So if you don't know what's being used or want to understand the query syntax or whatever, you can hit F12 and open developer tools and see the queries. And I think maybe we tried it in a previous video that we did. I'm not entirely sure, but
I think we did.
Yeah, it works really well. It's how I sort of learn new things that pop up, especially, I mean, the endpoint security config stuff, or the policies is a great example of that. It's a very complex endpoint, and there's no way I would have been able to figure it out if I hadn't been actively monitoring the dev tools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's where you can use those dev tools in place of things like Fiddler and things like that. Fiddler is fantastic, where it captures all the traffic, but it can be very invasive and lower the security of your device because you're re-signing everything on the device. You can use those dev tools and it's going to hold that token correctly.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about so this is actually relatively new as well, as far as being able to inventory non-modern apps. I want to say like maybe a couple months, because like we were trying to think, hey, how could we even expose which apps are out there? There wasn't a solution at all. So that's really nice to see that, hey, now MSI apps are being inventoried. So you can actually see, which key do I want here?
That's it. That's got it. It's just a matter of what.
All this is really showing, though, is the success or fail of a deployment of an application in Intune.
Yeah.
So, like, yes, it shows you stuff, but you can either get it from device level. Yeah.
Where were wasn't there like kind of like the uninstall hive?
Is it under inventories?
Yeah, inventory.
There we go. There we go. So there, for example, that's kind of a app that we could potentially query with Graph, for example.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
So that's essentially what we have here, is trying to figure out like, hey, what apps may you want to patch? And that was kind of the first challenge for us, is what data can we actually query again? So today it's MSIs that get inventoried. So that's a good start. Hopefully, I know the Intune team is trying to work on some inventory things. So EXE and MSI is probably about half of our apps are MSI and half are EXE. But probably one of the bigger challenges is, how do I know what's actually needs an update? So regardless of whether, I guess, you're using our product or you're trying to figure this out yourself, and this is a preview as well, like internal. We're hoping probably in the next couple of weeks we'll go live with this. But what we're trying to do is, since there's not really a WSUS concept for Intune, you're going right against Microsoft. The biggest thing that we're trying to figure out is, how can we deploy an app and have it update like an update only when it's applicable. So one of the things that we're working on that I can kind of show some internal stuff that we're doing here is, we're trying to build a Win32 app that functions like an update. And the way that we're doing that is, we're having a combination of both a detection method as well as a requirement that can be automated for you. So you can almost think of it as the way that it's really no different than, say, ConfigMgr apps. They have requirements as well. The difference there is, we're trying to make these requirements function in a way that we can understand whether an app is there and whether it's out of date. So basically, we would have two types of an app. We would have a base app that you would use for initial deployment, right? So this could be something that you make available. This, if you're doing this yourself, these would be things that you're packaging up in Intune. And what we're currently working on and hope to have a preview in the next couple of weeks is making the experience easier for actually updating those apps once they've been deployed. So the way that we initially did this when we released our Intune feature, we had an option that kind of worked. It works pretty well depending on how you're deploying an app. So basically what we do is, let's say, for example, Google Chrome 83 was published and you came into our tool. And one thing that you can do that's kind of neat, and this is all available in Graph as well, is you can automatically create assignments. So when we right-click our app, we expose a couple options that you can do within Intune, basically. But the one that kind of related to Graph is creating assignments, right? Mm-hmm. So this is all something like if you wanted to go in Graph Explorer and kind of learn how you can target these apps. Basically, what we do is, you can come in here, we can expose all the AD groups Azure AD groups that you want to target. And you can come in here, you can offset the deployment, kind of like an ADR if you're coming from ConfigMgr. So when we initially released this, kind of our way to try to stay up to date would be when a new version comes out, we could basically copy the assignments from an older version if it was created by us. So basically, let's say 83 was published and let's say 84 came out, we'll basically copy whatever group that you chose to target, whether you targeted directly in Intune or our tool, and then have, like, let's say version 84 auto target that. And one of the options by default is we can delete the assignment for the previous one. So that's kind of the way that we traditionally was like, okay, the apps are nice, but how can we try to make sure we're always deploying the latest? Now, the big challenge with that was, what if the app isn't always being deployed from Intune? What if it was installed from another tool or they installed it manually? We can't just target the same group. And there may be computers that have that app that are not in that group that we're duplicating that assignment from. So that's where we came up with this kind of idea of, could we make these requirements where we can basically perform the applicability checks? So the way that it's going to basically work is, let's say that that you have Google Chrome in your environment. So you could go in and you could enable the update version of that from our tool, and you could also enable the base application. So you would basically have, we come in here and look, we would just have Google Chrome, and then we would have an update. And what would happen is, if you deploy the update to, say, a large collection or a large grouping of, you assign it to a group, we're actually run the requirements kind of like an update you would kind of traditionally get. So you don't have to potentially be kind of limited based on some of the, the options of creating dynamic groups where you can't really base it on inventory. So basically what would happen is, let's say Chrome's not there, it would say it's not applicable, kind of like how you would have not applicable in the updates world if you're coming from ConfigMan. So that's the take that we're trying to work on internally and hoping to have a public preview soon, is basically an app in Intune that we can control some of that detection of whether or not it needs to be updated, regardless of how you deploy it, if that makes sense, using a required deployment.
Oh man, I like that.
Yeah, so it was
really cool.
It was interesting. Like we were kind of mulling over this, right? We don't have, like, there's no WFB for third-party updates. You don't have that access. The control's not there. There's no mechanism to do updates in Intune. It's just not there for third-party updates of any way, shape, or form. So I think it kind of came up in the beginning, right? How do I update that app? Like, I deployed it. I'll just do it again and do it again and again and again and again and again. And that was initially what we did, right? I deployed Chrome to those 600 devices. I'm going to assume they probably still have Chrome. I'm going to deploy new Chrome. But the shortcoming is I don't know what I don't know. I don't know who has Chrome that I didn't deploy it to. In a ConfigMan world, in a WSUS world, I've got applicability rules on WSUS updates. That's easy. You can blast out a crazy number of updates to all your devices, and you don't care if they're applicable because that's the Windows Update agent's job. And that doesn't exist here. And so what we're trying to recreate that.
So it sounds like, I mean, obviously without getting in too much into the details of what you're doing there, but let's get into the details of what you're doing there. So I mean, you're essentially
show something.
Putting
let's show stuff.
So you're building an application in Intune, and you've got a detection logic built into the app that interfaces with the Intune portal there with the chart you were looking at, that does its own applicability assessment, so that you don't have to go and build a query to see what's out there first to then target. So at least I think that's the way I'm understanding it. And so you could essentially push all your app updates to all your devices, and it'll only then apply to the ones that have the apps installed that the detection method picked up on.
That's the goal. We are so one of the fun things that we're coming across is there are some limitations with the amount of policy, like how big policy can be coming from Intune. So we're currently trying to evaluate like how many apps could you actually deploy to, say, all devices. So we actually figured this out yesterday, that there are some limitations, and we're working with the product group to understand, are there ways that we can minimize our footprint for how we're detecting apps and things like that. But yeah, the goal is, so when you said we're trying to offload it to the requirements within Intune, because there's not really any mechanisms, and that's kind of why we were talking about some of the limitations with querying inventory, because that's traditionally like how you would probably try to target older versions, right? So we really didn't have a method outside of trying to look at creating a requirement rule in an automated way that we could use to target the applicability of whether or not it actually needs it.
And so, I mean, so it sounds like, I mean, so if we're talking about just how the detection logic in Intune works, and so we're saying, okay, so there's no real decent inventory in Intune, which means that if you want to inventory what's there, you have to touch the client, you have to do something on the client. So it sounds like basically this allows you to push down the detection logic as part of that app to a device. Then the MDM agent on the machine processes the requirements, and then it says yes or no whether it's applicable, and then returns that data back to Intune. So the client is doing all the heavy lifting of the assessment of applicability, and then Intune is just holding the reporting piece of it, the summarized yes or no, the bit on their end.
That's the dream.
Okay,
that's the goal. That's the goal. Now we're definitely aware of some. And really, it comes down to some of the policy limitations of where we need to determine, like, how many apps can you actually target as required before you start hitting some limitations with Intune. So that's some stuff that we're kind of debugging before we actually go to a public preview, to make sure that we put out like what some of the limitations, if any, with the way that we're doing things. Things are looking good. Like for the vast majority of companies, like they should be able to target the apps that they need using this mechanism where if it's out of date, it just goes. And, this isn't something necessarily that only, we do. Obviously requirements, anybody can configure it. But Cody's kind of showing you some of what we're doing with our detection requirement rule here.
I've got to make it work first. So actually there's a bit of humor in all of this. So what we're kind of talking about limitations a lot here, and we ran into an interesting one where we are, and we'll probably try to show a little bit of this, hitting limits on Intune policy size. And so in a wonderful journey to attempt to minimize our policy size, I was heavily manipulating our script to hopefully shrink policy. I was like removing white. I felt like I was in the mid 90s again. I need this script as small as possible.
You need to minify PowerShell.
Oh my goodness. I didn't want to go all the way to like aliases. So I'm like removing white spaces and removing empty lines, leading and trailing spaces everywhere. I got
Your
it
whole
down.
script's a PowerShell one-liner.
That was about where I was headed, right? Yeah, and I got it from like 24 kilobytes down to 12 kilobytes. It's like, this is a great achievement, and it was, and so I've got some broken version on my computer. So I'm just grabbing a version that will actually do what we want it to do to show off the concept.
I'll take over a sec while you're getting that working, but I can show some stuff on the client side of some of the logging that we have to actually see what's going on, because that can be helpful in kind of understanding what's going on here. So this client, we've got, let's just go take a quick look at what we have here. I think this is probably a little quicker to see what we actually have deployed. So here's a list of our apps. So these are all kind of the base apps. So these would be just a normal Win32 app. Anything that doesn't have update in the name, so pretty much all of these. And these are kind of the update version of what we're testing, right? So this machine probably has about 30 apps available that would show up in company portal. This is where your end users could go get those installed. And then as we're testing some of the policy limits, we probably have about 70 or 80 Win32 apps that are using this update mechanism, right? So these are all targeted to that device. So if we come over here and kind of look at one of our clients, looks great. We have our available apps, but what's happening on the back end is you'll see, so we love logs here. So we've got our Intune log. So you can, of course, go in, you can see the Intune management extension, and that's going to show basically the apps evaluating, right? Because, at the end of the day, they are Win32 apps, and they're just using requirements. So we could go in that reg key, and you could see like whether or not they're applicable or not. But on our end, what we do log out. So we basically show, hey, we're running a requirement check. So we can see some lines of code here that's running the requirement rule, where we're basically scanning the inventory of that machine. And we're saying, hey, do you have iTunes, and is it less than this version? So that's kind of what we're doing in trying to recreate like an update mechanism for detecting apps and whether they're out of date. And that would get processed on the Intune management agent side of things to check that applicability and report back. And that's where you're going to see, whether or not these updates are compliant. Let me see if I can find a good one. I know we have some remote desktop manager free. I don't know if we've evaluated. So here's an example of one. So this is one where we had the option to skip the update if it's running. So we're always kind of running these RDP apps. Is what I'm sharing now as the app. But yeah, you're going to see install pending, and kind of that big thing that we're trying to accomplish is letting you know whether it's applicable. And that's where that script and the requirements are coming into play there. So that's really the only take of, how we see at least some type of solution, whether you're creating those requirements yourself, if you did want to have it where we could just deploy it out and kind of control it more like a third-party patch, if you will.
Yeah. So Justin, I've got a question for you. With the requirements that you're showing here, or the requirement applicability stuff, are you testing everything in the library every time that requirement goes out, or say for that application that you were just looking at, is the requirement solution that you're pushing out for that just for that application?
So yeah, actually I could kind of speak to that. That's been interesting.
Go ahead.
So it's a really good question. We almost immediately saw pain points or concerning points around this. So we basically tried to take our existing detection script, and it detects things, right? But there's some flexibility. There's assumptions that are made. You've got to be careful.
Sure.
And so when we realized that we wanted it to be a requirement script, we kind of started playing with this a little bit. And right off the bat, I was working with another coworker, Andrew, and we're doing like VLC or something. And I just hey, you know what? Install VLC 32-bit. So he did. I said, okay, now deploy our thing we made. It's got a requirement script. It's got a detection script, and So we created an update of VLC 64-bit,
Sure.
a newer version, and what do we expect it to happen happens. We weren't being specific enough, and you end up with 32-bit old VLC and 64-bit new
64-bit
VLC.
new, yeah.
And so we kind of had to go back to the drawing board. We already take note of the architecture of apps for other purposes, like for SCCM database scanning and things like that. So we have that info. So we started to tailor our script a little bit more and edit it to allow some more flexibility. So I've got like a bunch of parameters here now. I've got app to avoid. So here's your use case where you've got similarly named apps. I'm still searching the registry. I'm just going through HKLM, software, uninstall, whatever, the uninstall hives across the board.
Yeah.
So I've got to just allow some flexibility. So once we know of like a commonly named app, we can start tossing in apps to avoid with wildcards to say, okay, you found this, but ignore that. Or if we know specific MSI codes, we can toss them in there.
Yeah.
We've got your version matching. Then we also have like the version filter, which this is why none of the other ones were working, is because I was leaving version filter blank. So this is like a major version check, right? So I can't update my team viewer from 17 to 18, but I can update 17 to a new minor revision. So this is to like allow that flexibility within the script. Then there's that architecture component where, it depends on if we know we're deploying out a 64-bit app, then I'm going to search for 64-bit. If I know I'm searching for 32, I'm going to do 32. Or if it's just both, then do both. So that's kind of allowing us to create a little bit more of a dynamic script, and hopefully we're only hitting exactly what we want to hit, because false positives would be really bad in this scenario. If you had,
super detrimental,
350 of these updates deployed out, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, why did these random 37 apps install on every single device in my environment?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So this is the hope here, right? We're still enumerating through the hives, and we're just trying to dynamically create a script that is as specific as possible while allowing a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Nice.
Go ahead.
Well, so I was curious on the detection piece. So, I mean, we're saying that this is the applicability piece. So if I was to do this on my own, if I said, hey, I want to do something similar, but not with Patch by PC, how would where do I start on the app model on a Win32 app? Where is that at in the console or in graph or wherever?
Yeah, let's start basic. Let's just go, if you don't want to use PowerShell, do you want to bring up the console, or do you want me to, Cody?
It's like sacrilege.
I don't have it up still, if you've got it out here.
Yeah. Let me take that up. So say you did want to recreate an app that functioned kind of like an update using requirements, right? So, I mean, when you go into your apps, let's just go look at one where we've added a script, but we'll go see kind of some of those options. So let's just take a look at 7-zip, for example. So if you come over to the properties and requirements, so this is where you could do this, right? So, I mean, it's going to depend on the app. So we can see, the way that we're doing it, we're using a script just to help with some automation. We know some data that we're looking at, but it would really come down to that app, right? So let's say, you had some requirements for things like, a specific OS version, right? But kind of like with ConfigMan apps, let's go ahead and say you had something else. Let's say you had a file, right? So let's say you expected, VLC or 7-zip to be in something like, program files, right? So something like program files / let's say this, and this may not be right, but then something like 7z.exe. So if you were going for just kind of the most basic, option, right? So I guess I did that wrong. Let's take out the path. And let's say you wanted to say, hey, I want to see what's the version of that app, right? So let's say it was something like, we want to find where it's less than, right? So this is going to be a requirement of, should I install this app? And this is going to be very similar to ConfigMgr, right? So, I mean, they have requirements there as well. A lot of Sidecar actually comes from a lot of the functionality from ConfigMgr. Yeah. But this could be an example of, say, hey, I want to go manually kind of create my own update type experience, you could come in here and try to create things, right? This could be a registry. So maybe you're looking in something like, HQLM, and we can go take a look at this. Not everybody may know like how apps actually get stored in the registry. And this won't work for all apps. The biggest challenge is you probably will not be able to use the registry for MSIs, because the MSI code that gets stored in the uninstall hive, it changes with every version because that MSI GUID is unique.
Only if the developer deems it that way.
Most will.
So Microsoft Teams is an example of a non-changing MSI GUID. It's very nice of them to follow their own.
Well, that's because the thing they install isn't even the thing that you end up running. It's the installer. It's an engine to install for the users.
Yeah. It's not even using the MSI one after the first install anyway.
It's modern.
Modern. Let's go over to one that actually has a lot of apps, but it's really going to come down to kind of digging into that specific app to find out, hey, how do I detect that, right? So a lot of EXEs, what's nice about that is they might use the same registry key. So for example, CCleaner may always be in this specific hive, this specific key here. So you could do something like, in the case it was an EXE and it didn't change, you could say, let me go find CCleaner in this specific key, and let's find where it's less than the version that I'm creating the update for. So there's definitely some options using just, built in right from the UI if you didn't want to go an automated route using Graph, kind of like what we're doing here, because obviously we have to connect in and automate that functionality because we're doing this for, a ton of different tenants that are using Intune, right? But that could be how you could essentially create something similar, is just using requirements right here.
Yeah, cool.
And then if you need to get fancy for whatever, then you could use a script to do what you're doing. So the reason for that question was we kind of dove deep into the how the Patch My PC stuff works with and I wanted to kind of circle back to it's showing the challenges that you guys have gone through and the way you've navigated this, but it's something that's still accessible for other people to do as well. And that was the thing I want to make sure that we highlight, is that this is things that you can do and build out as you're building your Win32 apps out. I mean, this is what you can do yourself.
I mean, they've done a good job of making the feature set for at least a basic application installation. It's there, right? It's very similar. You've got the requirements, you've got detection scripts. There's a little flexibility in what's available. You can sign it or not sign it, change your architecture. If you've done app packaging in SCCM, most of the core stuff is there. Now there's some superseded.
It's a good V1.
Dependency chains, and there's some other things that are either being worked on or they're just not there at all. But I mean, at its core, like you can create an app in the GUI and you can deploy it out, and it's going to evaluate your detection and determine if it's there or not. It's familiar from that perspective.
Yep.
So I'm kind of curious, just because you guys, you're obviously living Intune, you're touching a lot of different tenants, different clients. Like, what are some of the challenges that you guys see when you're talking about like doing these apps, trying to do these updates? Does this look interesting at all, or what have you been doing to date to kind of maybe do some of the gaps that you may not get if you're in a traditional ConfigMan, where you get your updates and you have WSUS where you can get pretty flexible in applicability? Like, have you guys found like any creative ways to kind of help with things like this?
Honestly, the most success I've had with sort of when I drop the reins and let the client continue working with it is just education. It's just constantly making sure that they're comfortable with the application packaging process. If they're not, we just get a knock on the door. That's just kind of it at the end of the day.
Cool. The education's the big one. One of the things that we tend to do is training sessions that you record, so they can be, you can go back to them and reinforce and understand what's going on. Because look, different people learn in different ways, and the easiest way to capture that information is you sit there, you show the demonstration and you record it, and obviously you go to our channel
Plenty of videos there for Intune.
Yeah, there's a couple.
One or two.
A little bit.
I see you only got halfway through the advanced stuff.
And haven't watched any of the other. Oh man, you should, close it.
Oh no. Am I logged
But
in?
hey, by the way, Justin, go ahead and click on your channel. Congratulations, Justin. You hit 10,000 subscribers this week.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I
Well
did.
done,
work.
sir. Well done.
Yeah, and that's not just me though. I mean, we have user groups, we have Cody doing videos.
Yeah.
Like there's some a lot of other people doing some cool stuff over here too.
Good work.
Well,
you got the custom name as well.
What's that?
You got the custom name for the URL as well, the Patch My PC up in there.
Hey, we do too. Just type change that to Intune training. It works as well. Well, that
or aka.ms/IT.
we. Oh, you know what?
You need to fix your redirect.
I know that's the problem. That's what it is. So if you just do C for the channel and then type in Intune training, it'll take you there as well. So that's.
There we go.
That's why. Okay, it's the redirect. It's on the DNS. It's always DNS.
It's always DNS.
Oh, that's actually pretty cool. aka.ms/i.t. That's pretty.
You
solid.
have a man on the inside now.
And
Yeah.
aka.ms/Intune training, all one word as well.
Hey, I wonder if you can get a aka.ms/PMPC.
So guys, let's circle
I don't
back
have that
to this,
access anymore.
I really want to keep talking about this. I had a couple of questions. So,
Sure,
all right. So in my head, I was like, okay, so how you install or you package Chrome, right? Whatever, Chrome version 1, and then version 1.1 comes out. In my head, I imagined that your Patch My PC solution updated the existing package, but it's not actually doing that. It's creating a whole new package, and then it's just using a requirement to define whether it gets that update. Is that correct?
So the initial iteration was option A, right? I already know I have an app packaged. It's already targeting devices. I know those devices have Chrome. I'm pretty darn sure. I'm just going to hit them with the new version. But
sure.
The new hope is kind of the option B, right? I don't care if it's installed. I'm actually going to use the requirement to determine applicability. We're recreating applicability rules.
Yep.
I create a whole new app that's completely separate. I'm going to give it an update category and prepend it with the word update, and then I'm going to let the requirement rule do the legwork. But so it was kind of interesting when we initially thought of it. Oh, one thing that's fun about it though, at one point I said, hey, could we do this? And then Andrew and Justin both said we tried. I said, oh, okay, never mind. I said, well, what happened? Let's recreate it. Maybe something changed. Occasionally they fix stuff in Intune. Let's try it again. I said, well, what did you guys do? And there was kind of a humorous moment. Like, well, we deployed out we set up a requirement, and then we deployed it out as available. And then you still saw it in the company portal. It wasn't applicable. The requirement rule didn't pass, right? So a basic example would be, let's say you deployed out an application that had a requirement of you must be on Windows 10 1909, and you targeted a device that's on 1809. It would show up in the company portal, even though the requirements weren't met. And that's just odd, right? That's not how it works in ConfigMan. It doesn't really make sense in my head, but it's just the way it works. Now,
you would open the company portal and you'd be able to install it?
No, you'd open the company portal and you would try to install it, and then you'd get sad when it gave you a really vague error about your device not meeting requirements.
Okay. So it's displaying it's just not allowed to be installed.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, that's not great. And we recreated it and it still does that. But I was like, well, I mean, who does available updates, right? Like, that's silly. Let's deploy it as required. And when you deploy it as required, it acts how you'd expect it would, in that, like, it evaluates the requirement rule. It says, hey, this is not applicable. It's not required. And it never shows up. You never see it.
Sure.
So it worked. It was like a light bulb moment. And so then let's take it further. Let's do, because that's the recreation of WSUS. That's the recreation of the Windows Update agent. I can target whatever I want, and just let the clients use that metadata, so to speak, to say, well, do I need this? Yes or no? Nope. Toss it out. But the fun
that we ran into was it's a lot of metadata, I guess, from a Intune perspective, because we were hitting policy limits. Go ahead.
So back to that question about kind of, hey, what happens when Chrome gets updated? You create a new app, right? So the way that works, what I did is I switched our publisher to just an old demo catalog where we have an old version of Chrome, right? And this is the way it works today. So if you go download the public version, you're not going to see this Intune updates at all. It's just Intune apps.
Sure.
So the way that it works is, let me switch over to an active catalog that contains the latest Chrome. Right. So what's going to happen is if you use our default options, so that's going to be these two boxes checked. So when we initially went in and we said, hey, I want to go publish a new Win32 app for Google Chrome, right? I even went in through our tool, so I don't have to go afterwards, say you did 100 apps, to go manually deploy them. So we said, hey, I want to deploy Chrome to all users and make it available. You can come in, you can set deadlines, you can set restart, notification behavior. But what we're going to do is let me go ahead and run a sync and kind of show you how this happens real time. So we'll see. We're going to go download the latest bits for Chrome from Google. And we kind of use, this is, let's see.
I still chuckle every time I see 900,000 milliseconds. So I added some additional logging. And then Justin goes, can we put minutes? I was like, what? Yeah, all right.
No, 9,000 milliseconds. That's good.
Easily to what is that in Kelvin, right? We're talking about that.
So what's basically going to happen if you keep this option is we're going to detect, hey, we see that we published Chrome 80, but now version 84 is out. If you left the option to duplicate assignments, you're going to see that 84 is going to be targeted, and version 80, we're going to delete the assignment. Now this, I hope this works. This lab is a bit out of date, and we only keep up to 10 superseded relationships. We basically built our own supersedents in Intune, keeping track of stuff. So this one's still deploying. Let's see. Let's see what we have here.
Don't think it's going to delete the app, but it changed the nice.
So it depends. So you have the option. If we go back, you can delete the old app if you want.
Yeah, that last option.
Yep. So say when Google Chrome 84 comes out, I just want to delete 83 or anything before it. You can do that. By default, we keep it around. So that was kind of like our patching mechanism, if you will. Obviously, it will only work for the groups that you target. So only those machines that were targeted would auto get the new version targeted, which it works well. We have plenty of customers using it, but the requirements are going to allow us to be a bit more flexible. Even if it didn't come from that assignment, we could target, say, a broader scope and have that customization for you. So if we come in here, we can see the assignment, and we can see it's kind of got that same group. So that's been around since February. We've released that. So that's really cool. That's how we initially handled that. So it's pretty neat. I think you had another one. You said you had a couple questions.
That was the main one. So this is something that I get a lot of questions on Twitter around this. I think that just explained the best one. If you're manually updating applications in Intune, don't just do an in-place update on the Intune Win file and change the metadata.
Don't do that.
Create a new package, unassign the old one, at least keep it there for a week or so, and then get rid of it. But don't just use one package, which I've seen way too often, where people seem to think that creating the metadata is the hardest part of this, and I'm like, it's not. That's not complicated. Cool. So no, it's just interesting to see how you guys were handling that, and it's how I'd like to see it. So that's good.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we are getting close on the time here, but I guess to kind of circle back to the every man, kind of every woman, every person approach here of making this accessible to everyone. And so kind of deconstructing a little bit of what you did behind the scenes there. So essentially, you just got a script that is going out to, at least for it's going out and streaming down the content for Google Chrome from Google, and then
not
you've got
a
a script.
not a script. So this
Or
this
your
would be
engine, I guess.
a service. So it's a service, right? So the script would be used for the detection piece of the actual Intune app. But what's actually pulling that down and doing things like sending Teams notifications, it would be just a small service that would actually be running on either Windows 10 device or server device, just about 5 meg or so. And this would be what is essentially helping you automate that, right? So I mean, you would come in here and you say, hey, I want to check the catalog for the third-party updates say every night. And that's going to say, hey, Chrome went out. Let me go download the latest version of Chrome, right? And let me get the icon. Let me try to detect whether there's another version that we created before, and what action should I take if that happened. So,
Right. So I guess my point was, right. So like right there in your logs is a great spot. So the first 3 lines at the top there. So it was showing, or scroll back up. Yeah. So you're downloading Chrome from Google. From the vendor, and then you do have an engine running this. But if someone was wanting to write their own script to try to automate some of these pieces on their own or whatever, this is essentially, this is still accessible to everyone to be able to build your own if you need to, if you want to. If it's something you want to experiment with or try to build some of your own automation, it's not magic. It's just work.
Exactly.
Taking the time to build all the pieces out to do it. But essentially, you're getting the content and then you're streaming that stuff up to Intune, packaging it up as the Intune Win files, and setting up the deployments. You're automating all of those pieces, but you could also similarly do all these steps manually inside the GUI and end up with the same result. You're not doing anything magical that's special or proprietary to Patch My PC, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. So for sure. Everything's in. So kind of from step to step what we're actually doing, right? So you have your content. That's kind of the first piece, right? You need to get the installer. So whether that's Google Chrome's MSI, where do you actually grab that? So if you wanted to automate it, you'd have to know, where do I get it from, right? So Chrome's actually an interesting one where it's easy because they always have the same URL. Yeah, so that's super simple. Like if you could somehow have, say, a PowerShell script that downloads it every night, and let's say, is the hash of this new one the same as the old one? That's a way that you could kind of build your own. Hey, something happened. Let me try to update that. So download it local. In our case, we're obviously concerned about security where we're automating all this. We're going to check the payload. So we're going to make sure the hash matches what we expect it to be in our code sign catalog, right? I think the biggest piece from us that took probably the most time is actually figuring out the graph upload. So all I know is when David, one of our software engineers, was coding it, like we had to do something with splitting up the package in chunks in order for Azure to accept it. So
I was hoping that you were going to talk about this.
I don't know exactly what we're doing here. I could probably maybe provide context.
Can I tell you something fun about that one?
Yep.
If you use AZ copy, it does it all for you. So one interesting thing that I found doing this, because I do a very similar thing just in my workflow, but it's all just in VS Code and stuff. But basically, I found a limit where if an application was smaller than 9 meg, it would just bomb out. And then you would need to start using this upload chunk thing. But anything higher than 9 meg, you can push up using AZ copy, and it's like 10 times faster because you're not breaking a file into 4 meg bits and then throwing it up. But yeah, I just love seeing that uploading chunks.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to look at that for the bigger files for sure.
All you really need to do is just look at the payload. So you need to look at the Intune Win file that gets generated and just verify the overall size of it. The actual XML that is created when you do the Intune Win tells you what the expanded size of the file is. And if that's higher than 9 meg, AZ copy is amazing. It just makes it go a lot faster.
Yeah, and then
I'd be
kind of the
curious
last
about
piece.
including
Go ahead.
that. And oh no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the
Okay.
last piece that we would kind of automate here is whether you want to target it.
Yeah.
But I think what we could probably do is like how much PowerShell do we have like as examples? I know we could show some inventory stuff that we could provide. No, sorry, not show, but provide like in GitHub or something after in case you wanted to go check some stuff out. I know we could show some
That'd be awesome.
scanning.
Yeah, that
case,
would be really cool.
creating-
I'm so bad at doing things ad hoc. It's really terrible. Like I'll write an entire script in the console, and then just like, oh, that never went anywhere except the console. So
So that's where you've got to start transcript running every single
Yeah.
time you're in the console.
my history is maxed out. Everything's 9999999. So I can find it, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
there it
sure,
is.
sure.
Cool.
I use VS Code the way that Brian Dam uses Notepad++. Just leave all the tabs open all the time, and it just saves them and keeps them for me. And
Yep.
everything is saved as new file 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, so untitled.
Yes,
Yeah.
untitled.
It's good.
So just a quick one, guys, before we wrap up. You mentioned before that there's a service that's running for Patch My PC, and it runs on Windows 10. So what you're saying is, as an admin, I don't need to have a physical device running in my environment, like a server or something like that. I could just have it running on my laptop, and once a day it will go through and check to make sure that the updates are there.
Yep. Yeah.
You could.
Or I could
That's
have
awesome.
a VM sitting in my Azure tenant
Yeah.
that I spin
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably ideally something like that where it's always on, you don't miss a
Oh,
sync
definitely.
if you're sleeping. But yeah, it can definitely be Windows 10. Doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
server.
I'm just
yeah.
thinking from cloud-only orgs where they don't want to have infrastructure sitting up in the cloud or in a data center. I think it's a fantastic concept where we can just sit there and have it on a PC and it's just running.
And next step is doing like Docker or whatever the heck those things are.
Yeah,
that
for sure.
all the devs always talk
I have an
about.
idea in my head to make it real, like a quick and dirty approach to having infrastructure that doesn't really cost you a great deal. Is just having a virtual machine with this running and having an automated process that, at 9 p.m. every night, it turns the device on, runs the scan, updates any packages, pushes it out, and then shuts itself off.
So
that would be fun.
That's the dream, right? And that like the scan part's interesting because when working with SCCM, I can query the database and I can give you some pretty solid information and recommendations on what you need to patch. And it's just not there for Graph, for Intune. Now, ATP is there for that. There's actually really solid inventory from ATP, decent anyway. Then the data on the back end's a little odd, and they like to concatenate things together. And but you could work with it.
Yes.
So that's another avenue that might be interesting. I know that one perspective that I've heard a few times, it's a bit of a tangent, but it's interesting because we're talking about patching and applications have vulnerabilities, right? You're not patching apps, like you're patching vulnerabilities. I don't really care if Google Chrome's not up to date if it's not a security concern. It's generally kind of do, but from a high-level enterprise perspective, like, the threat hunting and going, and I want to patch that CVE, I want to patch that vulnerability. So, potentially looking at ATP to maybe drive some of these decisions. I know that they have remediate, and it's like, create a ticket in Intune to tell somebody to package the app. So some of it's there, right?
Can't go in and manually hit that API to create tickets for people to do things.
I've been trying to do that for a while. The endpoints are not currently exposed.
Steven spoke a little too early then. It looks like they're there. No. So
guys, so you guys both are well versed in config manager and just in client management and stuff. What would you say is kind of your, I guess, lesson, or real on a very high level, the things you like about Intune, the things you maybe think could be better? I know we've talked a little bit about how the challenges with Graph in general, but just kind of where are you at on your feelings about Intune as a standalone product, or versus thanks, Steve. Nothing with me in the chat over here. But so how do you like Intune? That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So
at the end, let's drag it out some more.
Well, from my perspective, I think they're targeting scenarios for people that need to get up and running. Maybe they haven't been exposed to ConfigMgr before and the capabilities, but they need something, say, simple, get apps, get some pretty basic inventory. And they're obviously working on, what are some gaps that are important for organizations that do want to come over here. So internally, we've actually got co-management set up. Today or yesterday, we actually flipped our workload over to Intune for apps, just primarily to get some actual data on, what do these updates actually look like? Could we not patch with ConfigMgr at all and hit third-party apps as well? So that was, just to be honest, that was our big reason why, we're a really small unit, small company. We want to say, hey, could we actually transition but not lose the third-party patching from our product within ConfigMan? So we actually shifted that over this week, and we're going to kind of monitor, what this looks like, and then hopefully put it out in public preview once we fix a few smaller things and actually see if internally if this would be a feasible option for us to do what we do. Obviously, there's the different set of features. ConfigMan's been around forever. It can do a ton of stuff. But that's kind of my perspective. What about you, Cody?
The more I work with it, I like the fact that Intune is in the cloud. But on the flip side, I really hate that Intune is in the cloud. And I guess the reason I mention it or kind of frame it like that is I have a little bit less insight into why something isn't working, because it is still an infrastructural issue, but I don't have any layer of abstraction to get to that. Scalability is completely out of my control, right? I've mentioned it, and we didn't get to show it, but we could probably send a screenshot or post the error, right? We're hitting issues where the Intune policy is exceeding maximum JSON length. And I have absolutely no control over that, other than to go and ask somebody a question and for them to say, yeah, that's a thing. We actually reduced it recently. Oh, okay, that's cool.
Well,
right.
Thanks for that, guys.
Can you make it bigger, please?
Yeah. So
Can you undo that?
It's a global
how big can you make
scalability. It's a global scalability issue. But I like Intune a lot, honestly. The more I use it, it's interesting. It's a completely different perspective on things. It makes you reevaluate decisions you've made on managing various aspects of your environment, right? How you manage your devices is ultimately going to be dictated by your tool set. And so if you start to shift towards Intune from another tool set, you're going to start saying, well, I can't do what I would used to do, but maybe you don't need to. Look at what you're doing. Look what you're working with. You can go one way or the other. You can either make the tool set fit what you need, or you can start to adjust what stop needing so many things, maybe, right? Work with what you got.
And I mean, you and I were having a little bit of this conversation before we got started, and that's definitely one of those things. And I think even Steven and I started in our episode 1 having this type of discussion of, it's the idea of lift and shift and take everything you are today and convert it to the cloud is not the right move here. It is a reevaluate, look at the tool set that is presented, and give it some credit and say, okay, it's built this way for a reason. Some stuff still needs to be added, but there's a reason that a lot of things aren't here. Why? And let me rebuild my infrastructure, my processes and things around the tool set, just like we did with our old tool set. The reason we have requirements many times are based on, well, the tool had this and we liked it, and so now it became a thing we always have to have, when in reality it's like, well, when's the last time anybody ever even looked at that thing that we turned on or that we use? And I think that's the thing I like the most about Intune, is that it helps us kind of strip away all the extra layers of administrivia that maybe we don't need to be wasting our time on. not saying that some of the stuff that we do today in ConfigMgr and other tools aren't as important, but I think it helps us reevaluate the how can I do less, of that tedious work that doesn't really add a ton of business value.
Yeah. And what's interesting there is you don't really have to choose between one, right? I mean, we've been using code management for over a year, and one of the interesting things that we've just been lighting up is conditional access, right? I mean, that's something that we ship that workload to Intune. We can have a lot of different conditions to actually be able to get some of our resources internally. So that's something that, we've had the best of both products, and we're actively using that within the company. So, I don't know if it's so much just, speaking like what you may be hearing. Is it one or the other? Or, if you're already in ConfigMan, maybe you just do both for a while and get the best of both features, right?
It's what works best for you as an organization.
Yeah.
For some organizations, they sit there and go, well, why do we want to have the on-prem resources? Let's get to the cloud as quick as we can.
Yep.
Yeah.
But then there's other organizations like Adam's that go, this cloud thing's just not going to stick around.
No.
So I got bad news, Adam.
But that's not what I've never said that about my company.
I will say, with the number of
Someone's
apps you
looking for a
have in ConfigMan, there's no way you could go to Intune. You'd just crash it.
Yeah. Well, so, this is a very, very valid thing. So and that's what I like about having the options, because we've already got the investment in ConfigMgr. We've already got the infrastructure there. We've got the pieces in place. Currently, we still have servers. We have a lot of servers that we still have to manage, and those aren't going away anytime soon. I mean, I was looking today. We have 1,700 servers that worldwide that we have to do something with.
That's just your SCCM environment, right?
Yes, that's 1 per 10 clients, right? So I mean, I think for us, why, if we're going to have to keep ConfigMgr running for any portion of our devices, we might as well leverage the tool set that is there. But we also should be moving towards and taking advantage of as many of the cloud pieces as we can as well. So, well, let's stop dragging. I'll stop dragging it out. It's all me. And then you guys can have fun with all your gifts in the chat. Maybe we can get gifts in the software center.
Hey, listen,
instead.
I'm paying attention.
Should I have had chat open the whole time? Is there some fun stuff going on over there? I feel like I'm missing out here.
So what is that?
Oh yeah, all kinds of gifts going on.
You hit Windows P or Windows period, it pops open the emoji dialog. So there's your
Windows semicolon.
tip of the day.
Windows semicolon, yeah, and then start typing things in. That'll kill a couple of days of productivity.
Windows P also gets you there.
Yeah.
What's it?
And the funny thing with the emojis is you can actually name your VMs with emojis.
Oh yeah,
just to wind up your infrastructure admins, because watch them just go, I'm just seeing squares, because it doesn't go across onto server OSs.
I noticed the other day when I put an emoji in, like just click the picture on my phone to put it into Twitter, that it reduced the character count by more than a single. I thought it was going to be like, oh, I'll just put pictures instead, and it'll be 1 character each. No, it's like counting all the actual underlying characters, apparently.
Yep.
Watch out. All these cool tips at the end. Always stick to the end. Yes.
Thanks for the Patch My PC guys for hanging out.
Yes.
I think we've had a lot of fun. But I figure if I jump in now and we can wrap it up and we can let people go and use the facilities.
let you go and pack your house up and move.
Yes, that would be useful too.
Congratulations on that. Yes, thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Go out to their Patch My PC YouTube channel, patchmypc.com. Find these guys on Twitter. We've got throw out your Twitter handles, guys.
He can't remember.
Don't type them, say them, because we'll have to put them in. We'll put them in. Whatever.
I'm at setup ConfigMgr. And I hope we were broad enough that we wanted to make sure we covered some of the challenges, some of the high level things that we went over. And if you have any questions, like reach out on Twitter. Hopefully we'll have a link within your YouTube where we can show some example scripts of, hey, this is how we were able to display this in our UI, these MSI apps that we detected. So you can actually go, hey, we're not using your product, but hey, let me be able to automate some of these queries, for example. So any questions around anything we talked about, send us a DM, tweet to us, and we can definitely provide any additional context if you want to learn maybe a little bit more of how we're doing that and some of the challenges that we faced trying to do these different things.
Yeah, these guys are on all the community platforms, so aka.ms/winadmins. There's a bunch of Patch My PC folks that hang out there, on Twitter and then on Reddit as well. So lots of accessibility for these guys. They are some of the top-notch community resources, so definitely reach out to them. And when you guys send us the scripts, we will add them to the description of the video and all that sort of stuff. And we'll let Stephen off the hook now. And thanks, guys.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Cody, what's your Twitter handle?
Yeah. Cody Mathis 123. So that's pretty consistent.
Awesome.
There you go. Nice.
Yeah.
All right. See you guys.
All right.
Yep. See you guys.
Tim.
Thanks.
Yeah.